So what a 90-day pause does, it gives some breathing room to a lot of the shippers and the buyers in the US to try and get stuff that they need quicker and through our gateway. But it's a 90-day pause. And so after 90 days, we're back to where we were on Friday, where there's all this uncertainty and potentially raised tariffs.
Welcome again to Chino y Chicano. I'm Enrique Cerna. Well, we're in a timeout, a big timeout globally, as the U.S. and China have decided to put a 90-day pause on their trade war against one another and the huge tariffs that they have imposed on one another as well. So the question is now as to what's going to happen during this period of the timeout. Also, what's going to happen afterwards? No one really seems to know. I did take that question to Sam Cho. He is a Port of Seattle Commissioner, and he gave us his insights on what he thinks is could happen down the road, but also what's been happening for the Port of Seattle as all of this tariff chaos has been going on. What could be happening now with businesses and at the port as they're handling this 90-day timeout period, and what it could mean for all of us down the road. Here's our conversation. Sam Cho, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I know you're a busy guy, not only with the position as a commissioner with the Port of Seattle, but also you work for the mayor's office, right?
That's right. I'm currently the director of strategic initiative, uh, doing downtown activation stuff and kind of side projects that the mayor has me chase.
Yeah. So probably a lot of people don't know that folks on the Port Commission have to stay employed. Otherwise, it's not
Yeah, it's a
just the whole
part-time
thing.
gig, even though they give us full-time work.
Yeah, yeah. And in these times, you're busy, no doubt
Yeah,
about it. So I want to step back here.
yeah,
Before the tariff chaos took hold,
mhm,
what was the Port of Seattle like? I mean,
yeah,
was it a busy place? Were there
yeah,
containers? Was there a lot of activity, ships out there
yeah.
waiting either to bring in stuff or to take out stuff?
I mean, we've always had a very vibrant port. We're a port city. We were founded, and obviously a lot of that legacy still lives here in the city, as a maritime history and tradition. Before Donald Trump's second term, we actually were still recovering from Donald Trump's first term. So you remember in 2018 when Donald Trump was president, he waged trade wars with China and other countries, very similar, but not quite as extreme as he is now. We lost a lot of trade volume from China, and China is 40% of our trade volume.
Whoa.
And so when that happened, trade volumes from China dipped. We were recovering. The good, I guess, the one good thing out of COVID from a port perspective was that the port was exploding at its seams during the pandemic because people were importing a lot of stuff, buying stuff off Amazon and stuff, and obviously there was a need for PPE and all these things. And so I'm sure you heard a lot of the news of ports being congested, vessels waiting out in the harbor trying to get in. And so COVID was kind of a huge tailwind for us in terms of activity and volume and containers. And then it tapered down in, 23, 24. And now we're dealing with what he's doing today.
So the volume with China, what are we talking about? What kind of goods?
A lot of the good, you'd be surprised. A lot of medical supplies, furniture, those type of goods that we import. A lot of consumer goods mostly come from China and also Vietnam. Actually, in 2018, when Donald Trump put his tariffs on China, a lot of that trade volume went to Vietnam, and we've been seeing steady growth from Vietnam, about 6% of their GDP growth every year, but their container volumes have been going up 30% year over year. And so I always say trade is like squeezing a balloon.
Hmm.
When you squeeze a balloon, the air doesn't disappear, it pops out somewhere else. And so back in 2018, when we were putting tariffs on China, Vietnam was where it kind of flowed to.
So did Vietnam move to try to make a deal in the wake of all this stuff?
So I was actually in Vietnam 2 weeks ago to visit the customers and the shippers and the people we deals and business with. I heard that Vietnam is at the top of the list, at least towards the top of the list, along with South Korea, for negotiating a deal. I think there is an expectation for there to be some sort of a trade deal in the next couple of months. But there's also an assumption that there will be at least a baseline of tariffs. And from what I was told by some executives in Vietnam, they are kind of factoring a baseline tariff of about 10% on Vietnamese goods. And so they're kind of preparing for that.
Okay, so now we're in this pause period, 90-day
Yeah.
pause on the trade war, the tariffs of 145%. Wow,
Hmm.
just incredible.
Yeah.
So both China and the U.S. kind of loggerheads here.
Yeah.
Where are we now? What is the situation like now? Are we getting
Yeah.
more activity in the port of Seattle or what?
So what's interesting is when Donald Trump took office and he announced all his tariffs, and they fluctuate, right? Like one day it's 80%, one day it's whatever, and so it's really hard to keep track of. But what happens in our industry is when you announce a tariff that's going to affect on X day, everyone ships their stuff before that day, right? So it's called front loading. And so what they do is they want to beat that deadline because they don't want to pay those tariffs. So every time you push back a deadline, you're encouraging essentially shippers to like rush the shipments, right? So what a 90-day pause does, it gives some breathing room to a lot of the shippers and the buyers in the US to try and get stuff that they need quicker and through our gateway. Um, and so I think we will see some volume recover in the next couple of weeks because when I talk to business owners and corporations, what I've heard is that because of these tariffs, they've either paused orders or they've held orders at the factory, at terminals, or in containers, and they did not send them because they didn't want to pay the 145 tariffs. In fact, I just got feedback from someone who said, I rerouted my containers to Vancouver, Canada, put them in a warehouse on bond, right? And it's just sitting there.
What does that mean when they put something on bond?
So basically, they're basically paying a huge storage fee
Oh,
to
wow.
just to keep them there, hoping that there's a deal,
Yeah,
so that when the tariff rates come down, they can bring them in, right? And so, and usually, what that means is that the goods are used as collateral for storing it, right?
I
So
see.
if you can't pay the storage
Yeah,
fees, you lose the goods
it's
essentially,
like
right?
putting up your house.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And so that's essentially what's been happening. And so I do think that we're going to see all those goods that were sitting at the ports and the warehouses and the storage facilities flow into the harbor. But it's a 90-day pause. And so after 90 days, we're back to where we were on Friday, where there's all this uncertainty and potentially raised tariffs. And you got to remember, it takes months to manufacture things, right? And so if you're a big box retailer or a small business preparing for the holiday season coming this year, right? You're not sure if you can put in orders or manufacture anything in this tariff environment because you don't know if in 3 months those goods are going to get taxed at 100%, 80%, 50%, right? You got to factor in these things into your cost basis. And if you can't do that, you're just not going to make a move.
And that goes back to this whole thing of business folks trying to be able to plan.
Yeah.
And you can't really. I mean, you
No,
can to a little bit of a degree because if you want to try to get something in during this pause period,
right.
but after that, you don't know what to expect.
Yeah, I think it certainly it certainly does not help businesses plan long term, right? We talk about making investments, build manufacturing, all this, stuff, which is a worthy conversation. But I don't know how a business makes an investment decision for the next 5 to 10 years, right? When there's so much uncertainty around what the tariff environment's going to look like, what things are going to cost, etc. And so all this uncertainty is basically everyone's kind of at a standstill.
So, what about Christmas toys and all that stuff? We've been talking
Apparently, you
to.
don't need $10.
Yeah,
You can,
well, yeah. I think you probably needed 10. I usually, but I have grandkids, so And they're boys. I don't know that
Yeah,
they need a doll so much, but they do need toys. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at the beginning of this entire conversation, everyone was debating whether or not tariffs are inflationary. I don't really understand how it can not be inflationary. Essentially paying a tax on goods that are being imported into this country. And so, in that sense, this is interesting about Trump's comments is that for a long time, I thought he didn't understand that he was just oblivious to the effects of tariffs, or he keeps saying China's going to pay the tariffs. China's going to pay the tariffs. Well, now he's changed his tune and said, well, things are going to get more expensive and you might have to buy some less dolls. So it tells you like he either has finally come to the realization and he's trying to deal with China and all these countries and struck a deal because he's learned his lesson, or he's known all along and he's been disingenuous. So it's hard to say exactly where his head's at.
Yeah, it is. That's always been hard to figure out. Let's face it. Um, but then the reality for Americans is just this chaotic kind of ricochet effect.
Yeah,
You don't know what to do. You don't know what to
yeah,
plan for,
and
particularly if
and
you're a business person.
business person, but also for consumers. I was fighting this rumor, viral videos around the port being empty. Oh, it's a ghost town. There's no ships. And that triggers panic buying, and everyone's going to start hoarding things like toilet paper again, right? And that's not good either. And so I think there are some trickle down effects to what's happening here, unintended consequences that we probably won't know for several months, if not several years. So it's a really uncertain time for us.
You've been doing these Instagram
Yeah,
shorts.
But I thought I'd come on and clear the air a little bit as I'm seeing more and more social media posts suggesting that the port of Seattle is empty or a ghost town or that there are no vessels, which isn't true. In fact, let me just show you real quick. As you can see, there are very much vessels here at the harbor filled with containers being loaded and offloaded. The phenomenon that we're seeing right now is called front loading. Basically, because Donald Trump has put a 90-day pause on his Liberation Day tariffs, all the importers and shippers are rushing to get their containers through ports and into the United States before the clock runs out.
I think you're doing a good job with that. It's
thank you.
good explanatory things, which
Yeah,
guys like me need. I'm not an economist like you, but that I find that interesting that you said that because I did see a CNN interview with one of your fellow port
yeah,
commissioners that gave the impression that everything was
yeah,
just dead.
yeah. Well, I think
Is that why
it,
you did that?
I think part of it was to stem the panic,
Okay.
right? I think, in that interview specifically, they clipped that excerpt. But if you watch the entire clip, he explains. I
Okay.
think in that moment there weren't any ships in the harbor, but it's like like any parking lot. There aren't always cars parked in a lot, right? Doesn't
Right.
mean the parking lot's empty.
So he
So
was probably speaking to the day or the time
in the
that we're
moment,
talking.
I think
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
speaking in the moment,
Yeah, yeah,
which is
okay.
totally fine. And yes, just yesterday I was at my office and we had four vessels at our harbor, right? But I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that we're not going to see a slowdown. That doesn't mean that there's no threats or headwinds our way. I think there definitely has been indicators that show that our port is slowing down as a result of these tariffs, right? And so I don't want to sugarcoat it or seem disingenuous by saying, no, there are ships, we're fine. We're not fine. I'm just trying not to cause unnecessary panic,
Right.
right? I think for me, it's uh, if the narrative and the perception is that the port is closed or not operating, who's going to send anything here?
Right.
Right? Who's going to want to do business with us when they think we're closed? I want to avoid a death spiral here where the rumor perpetuates and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where less shippers are coming here because they're under the impression that we are closed or a ghost town or empty, right? And so for me, it's just let's just get to the facts. Let's just be straight about it, right? I'm not going to predict the future. I'm telling you what the situation is today because the businesses don't know, you don't know, and I don't know what this guy's going to do tomorrow.
Okay, let's talk about eggs. One of the things you
Yeah,
did on Instagram was one
yeah,
about eggs. I was asking you, how did
yeah.
you get that egg to be up there in the screen?
This is why egg prices are so damn high and why Donald Trump's policy could make it worse.
Um, what are the price of eggs right now? I mean, has anything changed with that?
They're still at historical highs. The last time I checked, they've come down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think the market is recovering. Look, the egg market is interesting and tough because, because of this avian influenza, bird flu, a lot of farmers have had to kill their chickens to stop the spread. It takes time to repopulate the flocks, and that's why the recovery has been really slow. But the other interesting thing about this is that it's actually really hard to import eggs into the United States.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I talked about in my videos is that normally when you have a shortage of anything, you import it to supplement the shortage, right? And we actually used to import a lot of eggs from Canada until we put tariffs on them.
Till we piss them off.
Yeah, until we piss them
Yeah.
off and they won't buy or sell anything to us.
Yeah.
But the U.S. has a very unique regulation. The FDA has a very, or USDA has a very, very unique regulation on eggs. Have you noticed that we refrigerate our eggs, and in Europe they don't?
Yeah.
If you go to a grocery store in Europe, the eggs are just sitting on the shelves and not in the refrigerator. And the reason for that is because our regulations require egg farmers to spray the eggs with a solvent that essentially calcifies and gets rid of the a layer. It's a layer of the egg, and that's why eggs are so clean in the U.S. Like they're not dirty, they're pretty uniform, right? But what that does is it gets rid of a layer of insulation and preservation. And so after doing that, we have to put the eggs in a refrigerator to keep them good. They don't do that in Europe.
Yeah.
And so because of that regulation, they can't export their eggs here because they don't comply with the same sanitary laws, which makes it really difficult for us to import eggs from anywhere. Uh, just as a wonky term, this is called a non-tariff barrier, right? So it's not that the tariffs on eggs are high, it's that our regulations here prohibit those eggs from being imported into our country, right? And this is a huge point of contention in trade
Right.
negotiations with
Yes. Yeah.
non-tariff barriers, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think the recovery is slower, is because our markets can't adapt as quickly due to some regulations.
We don't have that many egg growers in the U.S.
Well, we have a lot of egg growers, but I think it's the sheer fact that they've had to kill, I think it was like 800 million
Oh,
chickens.
because of yeah.
Yeah, because of the bird flu
Right,
pandemic,
right, right, right. Yeah,
right?
interesting as you say that about eggs, because you know, farm kid growing up, we had
Yeah,
chickens, we had our own eggs and things like
yeah.
that. So I don't ever remember putting eggs in a refrigerator when I was a kid
Oh my
because
goodness,
we
yeah,
had our
same.
own,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we got them from the hens
yeah.
and
Because
all of that.
you didn't spray them like you have
No,
to
no, no,
in,
we didn't.
yeah,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course that was then, and yeah,
yeah,
we
yeah.
didn't really. I don't ever remember getting sick from that either.
No, no,
So let's talk about for me as your basic consumer. What does this
yeah,
all mean to me? I mean,
yeah,
what are from availability of goods to
yeah.
prices to all these things? Just your average consumer.
Yeah, I mean, to the average consumer, it's going to hit your pocketbooks, right? Everything from the prices of goods will go up. I think there will be a scarcity of goods because not as many companies are going to import them. Um, you might see less diversity in the different types of goods, because remember, like Donald Trump put tariffs on 85 different countries. We import things, even if they're the same item from different countries, right? Because there's different and different quality. Um, and so I think that you're going to lose variety, prices will go up, and there will be less of it. I think generally, what's fascinating about this is that we've been railing on this problem of inflation, right? Oh, inflation is bad, inflation is bad, inflation is bad. But everything that they're doing seems to be policies that are going to make it worse. And so
Yeah.
I just don't, there's like a cognitive dissonance there that I just don't understand.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance, especially with the whole fact that, hey, it's going to be great. Kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of like when we went through COVID. Oh, it'll be gone by April.
Yeah.
And so
Or you
it's
should drink
almost,
bleach.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the whole idea, oh, we're going to negotiate and it's going to be, and they're knocking on our door, which, I'm sure some countries are,
Yeah.
but it's not going to go poof. It is
Yeah.
something that's going to be there, which makes no sense for our economy. How has it affected port operations?
Well, from an operational side, we always struggle when there's a surge in volume.
Hmm.
During the pandemic, we got so many containers, so many vessels, we really struggled to get them off the docks, and there was a lot of congestion. Um, When the port slows down, it becomes a little faster and more efficient because there's more space and there's more time to kind of plan. And so right now, it's from a terminal operation standpoint, it's not so bad. I think one thing that is a major struggle and people don't realize is imports and exports are linked, right? And so to give you an example, if there's not enough containers to justify coming to Seattle or Tacoma, a ship will do what's called a blank sailing. They will skip our port,
Hmm.
right? But you would think, okay, skipping a port, that means those imports don't come into the country or through a port. But it affects exports too, because those same ships reload their vessels with exports. So if you have a ship that skips, not only are you losing the imports, but you're also losing the exports. Those farmers in Eastern Washington, right? The apple growers, the hay exporters, the potato farmers, they are losing the opportunity to put a container on a ship every time a ship skips our port. And this kills their business. It kills their business from a customer relation standpoint, but they're losing product. And these guys can't afford to leave their perishable goods on a terminal for a week to wait for the next vessel,
Right.
right? And so this for us as a state is a double whammy because we're a very, very trade dependent state,
Right.
both on imports and exports. 40% of our jobs in the state are dependent on trade. Um, and so our concern is exactly that. If a container doesn't, and another thing I'll talk about is that when a container comes in, it gets emptied and then it gets filled with an export to put on a ship. If that container doesn't come here, that means there's no container for exports either, right? So it's all linked, and there's again this flywheel effect or halo effect that really hurts our farmers and exporters as well.
So it's almost a domino type of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah, that
exactly.
that hits you all the way down the
Yeah,
line. Um, so what is the port doing? What can
yeah,
it do to
yeah,
plan or deal with this? Or are you like a business? You're
yeah,
just kind of having to go with the flow because it's so fluid.
yeah. We're like a nonprofit business, and in the sense that we make money off of every container that comes to this port. We have zero control over tariffs. We have, a little bit of control over terminal operations. Um, but what we do is we get out there and we market ourselves as hard as we can to these shippers to say, hey, you should come to our port. You should come and send your goods to Seattle and Tacoma as opposed to Vancouver or Prince Rupert or Oakland, California, right? And we do that by saying we're faster, we're more efficient, we'll save you money, etc. So we can try and make the customer experience, that's the term businesses would use, right?
Kind of
We
like
try to
Nordstrom, the customer comes
exactly.
first.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we focus on becoming what we call best in class of service, right? And so if we can reduce the number of hours a truck driver sits at the terminal, or we can speed up the time that it takes to unload a container vessel, right? And save these guys money because we're so much more efficient at what we do think we can make a difference in bringing those container vessels back to the Seattle and Tacoma.
You may be like a nonprofit, but you're not. I mean, let's face it, because I
Yeah,
think even nonprofits run as businesses in many ways. You got
yeah.
to have a
They
business
make they
structure.
make they make
Yeah,
good money.
it's so long term. So, uh, what's your best hope for in all of this? Because it just seems
Oh
like
man.
at this point, again, there's a pause. I suppose something could be negotiated in the end, but
Mhm.
it just seems, again, so fluid that it's hard to really figure.
Yeah. I think my best hope is that we give Trump the benefit of the doubt and he negotiates amazing trade deals that bolster um, our exports and our imports. And, he says that he wants to bring manufacturing back, which we haven't talked about yet, but he wants to bring manufacturing back, which I think is, a worthy pursuit.
Is
I
it
also
really, is it really possible? Is that a
It's a good
reality?
question. So I think the question around bringing manufacturing to this country is a nuanced one, right? And so uh, ask yourself, like, do we want to make Nike shoes in the United States? Probably not, right? I think Dave Chappelle said it best, where he's like, I want to wear Nike shoes. I don't want to make them, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's spot on. right? I think they
Plus,
would
if we
become
make them here, the price is probably
the
gonna,
price would be
they're already
insane.
high.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They would be so expensive, right? And so that's not really what I'm interested in when it comes to manufacturing.
Yeah.
I am interested in though is like high value goods or sophisticated manufactured goods. China's making some really cool EV vehicles, right? We don't currently allow them to come into this country, but if China agreed to set up manufacturing plants for cars, that would be great. There are a lot of other goods that are more high margin, high tech goods that I think the U.S. would benefit from manufacturing here, right? And so that's the kind of manufacturing I would like to see. Um, I think uh, there is space for that, and there's, obviously the appetite to bring that stuff back. But look, the way that they're doing this is they're putting tariffs on everything, right? So why are we putting tariffs on textiles and things we'll never manufacture in this country, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's like um, uh, taking a knife to a gunfight, right? It just doesn't seem right, right? And so there's no strategy behind it, and that's what's more concerning to me is that I think the goal of reducing the trade deficit, bringing manufacturing back to this country, I don't have a problem with. It's the tactics and the lack of strategy that is very concerning, right? And to answer your earlier question about what my best hope is I really hope that after this is all said and done this has not done so much damage to our
Yeah.
reputation as a country that even with a deal, we don't recover. That would be the final blow. I think if people are like, oh, those guys suck, and we don't want to do business with them anymore, regardless of this deal, that would not have been worth any trade deal, right? And I think we take for granted how much privilege we have as a country, right? American exceptionalism, right, as a lot of people call it, is real, and we are really, really hurting that reputation right now.
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That it's really hurting us, and our reputation globally is kind of decreasing right now. I think because of the
Yeah,
chaos, and it's
yeah,
almost like in this sense too. I hate to kind of veer off here, but the effort to trim the federal government, or
yeah,
actually tear it down at this point. That's the
yeah,
problem. Is it's being torn down, but there's
yeah,
no real plan. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, do I think that there's a lot of waste in the government? Yeah, I think generally everyone probably agrees with that
sure.
principle.
Yeah,
But this image of a chainsaw, it's like, no, we need a scalpel,
yeah,
right? And we need to trim the fat, right? Not cut off limbs,
right.
right? And so that this lack of strategy, I mean, even manufacturing, it's like, okay, I agree with your idea to bring manufacturing back, but what are we actually doing to do that, right? Putting this tariffs aside for a second, right? The only thing we had was the CHIPS Act, which Biden passed. The CHIPS Act invested billions of dollars in manufacturing, and he's dismantling that,
Right.
right? So what is the actual strategy and plan to bolster and encourage and catalyze companies to invest in manufacturing? It feels like we're putting the cart in front of the horse because we don't actually have a plan and we'll just say we're going to do it.
Right.
And that's generally not how things work.
Yeah. When you mention like China and manufacturing of EVs,
Yeah.
is that possible that something like that could actually happen in the state of Washington?
Yeah, okay, so here's my controversial but very truthful answer on manufacturing, right? And maybe even to a certain extent on Washington State. Um, Labor costs are still going to be very high. Right. That
Right.
is probably our single biggest barrier to
It
bringing
is.
manufacturing back,
Right.
right?
Right.
Uh, putting the atrophy of actual skills to the side. I think you can build that muscle back up over years. But any form of manufacturing that comes back to the United States, hereafter will likely involve a high level of automation.
Mhm.
Right. So robotics, assemblage by automation will likely be an element of manufacturing. And automation is kind of the great equalizer, right? In the sense that you are reducing the labor costs so that the price of the goods as well as the price of labor goes down, right? Now, a lot of people will say, then you're not creating as many jobs or, you're going to displace jobs. Well, if you're replacing existing manufacturing facilities with automation, then yeah, you can argue that you're replacing jobs. But we don't have manufacturing to start with, right? So in my view, it's still a net gain in jobs, right? And it's a net gain in productivity, it's a net gain in GDP growth, and it's a reduction in cost and inflation, right? And so I tend to believe that if manufacturing comes back, it's not going to be your typical assembly line with like 30 people on it. It will be automated to a certain extent, but even automation creates jobs because you need someone to look after the robots too,
Right.
right? And these are high skilled jobs. These are highly technical jobs, right? And so we have a lot of skilled workers today in America who have been displaced because their industries no longer exist, like the auto manufacturing, industry or other manufacturing, whether it's the steel industry or coal mining industry, people who are very good and very technical. We can retrain them, right, to be robot mechanics
Right. Yeah.
or something along those lines, right? And so I tend to believe that if we bring automation back to the United States, I mean, if we bring manufacturing back to the United States, even with some elements of automation, it will still be a net gain in jobs for America and for
I
Washington.
actually agree with you because I have seen it happen in certain companies in the
Hmm.
state already,
Yeah,
where that's happening, where people that have been maybe they didn't have college backgrounds and things like that, but they're trained to run, automated
right.
equipment,
It-
and they're able to adapt, and they make a
yeah.
good living. Yeah,
It's actually like you look at farming back in the 19th century, everything was manual,
right.
right? And did anyone protest the plow or the tractor? I don't think
Yeah,
so,
to
right?
make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
little make it
yeah.
a little easier, more efficient. Productivity went up, and so I think that that is kind of the impasse that we're on as a society as well. And so the longshoremen, when they first start containerizing goods, the longshoremen actually were against containerization.
Huh.
And the reason was because putting things in 40-foot or 20-foot containers made things so efficient, right? Because you remember longshoremen used to use picks and load things onto pallets and then
Oh.
put them onto the hull of the vessels, right? It was a super inefficient way of shipping things. But the container made things super efficient, and they were afraid that the efficiency will kill jobs. Well, what ended up happening is that because of the efficiency, trade exploded. Like we expanded trade by so much that there are more longshoremen today than there was back then,
Hmm.
right? And it's because of this expansion of the economy. The pie got bigger. And so that I think that's what we need to focus on. We need to
Right.
focus on expanding the pie.
Weird question here. Does
Yeah.
AI have a role in any of that?
Yeah, so that's actually a huge controversy in our industry. With automation, you could in theory also incorporate AI. I think there's a long way to go for AI to be able to, for instance, pick up a container, put it in the right place on the terminal, or stuff like that. It's very, very precise, right? Something that at this point only humans can be uh, accurate and precise at. I think with how quickly AI is evolving, I wouldn't be surprised if some software does get developed where an AI can precisely pick up a container and place it where it needs to be. But I do think there's kind of a middle ground here where I've been to Asia and Europe where they have automated terminals. And basically, it's kind of a misnomer, automated, because what it really is, it's remote controlled.
Hmm.
So basically, these guys right now go up like 80 feet in the air and they're there for a 4 hour shift. But these days, they have these control room and they sit, it looks like a Wall Street trading desk. And they sit in a control room and they're moving these joysticks like a game. And they have a camera feed. And it's really not that different from being up 80 feet in the air, but they're just in an air conditioned room with the bathroom, right? And so, it's better work conditions, it's safer and potentially more efficient, but you're still keeping the jobs because someone still needs to be behind the sticks to
Right.
move the cranes. I think that's a good middle ground. And so, obviously the risk of that is that if you could do it remotely, you could outsource it to someone in China or India. I think the fear of the longshore is that you're gonna have a guy in India driving a crane in Seattle. And obviously I'm not in favor of that, and I would
Right.
totally put policies in place that require the workers to be local.
Yeah. Well, it is our region, and we got to protect the jobs here. So
Absolutely.
that's anything else you want to add here about all of this that I haven't asked you about what people should keep in mind?
No, I think every day is a new headline, it feels like. And I know this doesn't sound super positive, but I remember back in 2016 when Donald Trump first got elected, I had just come out of the Obama administration, I was at my local Best Buy and I ran into John King, the CNN guy.
CNN guy, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just chatting with him a little bit, and he and I were obviously both very disappointed by the election results. And his his response was, "The Republic will survive," right? And so I think my message is, we're going to survive. We're going to make it out of this, but we have a lot of work ahead of us because the reputational damage, the economic damage is going to be drastic, not to mention the attack on diversity, equity, inclusion, and just all that stuff that we are dealing with right now, even as a port with deportations. We have so much damage control and repair to do once this nightmare is over. Um, but if there's anything that I know is that we live in a bubble here in Seattle and Washington State, and we're up for the fight. And I feel really fortunate that we have a state that values all these things. They're sticking by those values, and post the Trump era, we're definitely going to come back better and stronger.
Sam Cho, thank you for taking the time to educate me on this. And I think hopefully we
Absolutely.
are educating other folks about the tariffs, the impact, and just how the Port of Seattle even operates during this time of a lot of chaos. So, hey, thanks.
Hey, thanks for having me.
The Chino y Chicano podcast is available on your favorite podcast provider.
You can watch the video version on YouTube and Converge Media, a leading producer of culturally relevant content in the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk more later.